Hey everyone, let's pick back up on chapter 6 of Their Eyes Were Watching God. Now this is a pretty lengthy chapter, which is why we split it up over 2 days. So now we're going into part 2 of chapter 6. And when I pick up reading, I want for you to consider what is Jody's perspective. We've gotten a lot of Janie's perspective and why she's unhappy in the marriage, but let's see how Jody's feeling as well. So we're going to start halfway down the page. Joe returned to the store full of pleasure and good humor, but he didn't want Janie to notice it because he saw that she was sullen and he resented that. So remember, Janie is sullen or upset because Jody wouldn't let her go to the mule's ceremony. She had no right to be, the way he thought things out. She wasn't even appreciative of his efforts, and she had plenty cause to be. Here he was just pouring honor all over her, building a high chair for her to sit in and overlook the world, and here she was pouting over it. Not that he wanted anybody else, but just too many women would be glad to be in her place. He ought to box her jaws. He didn't feel like fighting today, so he made an attack upon her position backhand. So what is Jody's perspective in this paragraph? So Jody, he has worked very hard. He's essentially created this town from the ground up and helped all the people in it. And he's given Janie everything that he feels that she's wanted. She has good clothes, a good house, a good status position in their society. And he describes it as building her a high chair or a throne to sit in. However, he doesn't tell her how he feels. He thinks all these things, but he doesn't explain it to her. And instead, he tries to pick a fight instead. And so this indicates how Jody and Janie's primary issue is their lack of communication. They're feeling all these things and thinking these things about each other and feeling these frustrations, but they don't talk to one another about it. And therefore, their frustrations with one another festers and becomes a much bigger problem than it originally was. So let's keep reading and see how this goes. This is Jody speaking. I had a laugh at the people out there in the woods this morning, Janie. You can't help but laugh at the capers they cuts. But all the same, I wish my people would get more business in 'em and not spend so much time on foolishness. Everybody can't be like you, Jody. Somebody is bound to want to laugh and play. Who don't love to laugh and play? Jody asked. You make it out like you don't, anyhow. Ay, God, I don't make out no such a lie, but it's a time for all things. But it's awful to see so many people don't want nothing but a full belly and a place to lay down and sleep afterwards. It makes me sad sometimes, and then again it makes me mad. They say things sometimes that tickles me nearly to death, but I won't laugh just to discourage 'em. Janie took the easy way away from a fuss. She didn't change her mind, but she agreed with her mouth. Her heart said, even so, but you don't have to cry about it. All right, so now after Janie and Jody's argument, which didn't last very long because Janie gave in, I want for us to consider how these following pages return to the theme of community. But sometimes Sam Watson and Lige Moss forced a belly laugh out of Joe himself with their eternal arguments. It never ended because there was no end to reach. It was a contest in hyperbole and carried on for no other reason. Maybe Sam would be sitting on the porch when Lige walked up. If nobody was there to speak of, nothing happened. But if the town was there, like on a Saturday night, Lige would come up with a very grave air. Couldn't even pass the time of day for being so busy thinking. Then, when he was asked what was the matter in order to start him off, he'd say, "This question done about drove me crazy. And Sam, he knows so much into things, I want some information on the subject." Walter Thomas was due to speak up and egg the matter on. "Yeah, Sam's always got more information than he knows what to do with. He's about to tell you whatever it is you wants to know." Sam begins an elaborate show of avoiding the struggle that draws everybody on the porch into it. "How come you want me to tell you? You always claim God done meet you round the corner and talked his inside business with you. Ain't no use you asking me nothing. I'm questioning's you." So with this conversation going on, you'll notice in the way that it's worded, it's indicating that this happens time and time again. This isn't a special occurrence. Sam and Lige and Walter, they have these conversations where they tease each other all the time. And so when we go back to Jody, we can tell that Jody wishes everyone would work harder. However, even Jody can't help but enjoy the company of these three men and also the rest of the community. And I do want to establish an important note, if you haven't noticed this yet. These people, Lige and Sam and Walter, these are the same people from the beginning of the novel in chapter 1 when Janie comes walking down the street. So remember, Sam, for instance, Sam Watson is Phoebe's husband, and Phoebe's is Janie's friend. And Janie's telling Phoebe this story of her life. So that helps us understand that Eatonville, where all these people live, is where Janie was returning to in chapter 1. So keep that in mind because it'll help you kind of see how the story all is cohesive and comes together. Now, going back to what we've been talking about, in the first chapter, we saw that community can be negative in the fact of how it gossips. However, here we also see the positive of the community, where they have these traditions, these daily traditions of porch sitting and teasing each other, and how it brings them closer together and brings happiness into their life. And so for those of you who are thinking about doing your project on community, the theme of community, this is some really good information that you can work with. All right, let's keep reading, and I want for you to consider, what are the men sitting on the porch talking about? How are you going to do that, Sam? When I arrived this conversation myself, I'm asking you. Asking me what? Sam asked. You ain't told me the subject yet. Don't aim to tell you. I aim to keep you in the dark all the time. If you're smart like you let on you is, you can find out. You scared to let me know what it is, 'cause you know I'll tear it to pieces. You gotta have a subject to talk from. Do you can't talk? If a man ain't got no bounds, he ain't got no place to stop. By this time, they are the center of the world, meaning that everybody who's on the porch is paying attention to them, which is their goal, is to get all this attention. Well, all right then. Since you own up you ain't smart enough to find out what I'm asking about, I'll tell you. What is it that keeps a man from getting burnt on the red-hot stove? Caution or nature? Shucks. I thought you had something hard to ask me. Walter can tell you that. If the conversation is too deep for you, how come you don't tell me so and hush up? Walter can't tell me nothing of the kind. I'm an educated man. I keeps my arrangements in my hands. And if it kept me up all nights long studying about it, Walter ain't liable to be no help to me. I needs a man like you. Then again, Lige, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to run this conversation from the gnat heel unto the lice. It's nature that keeps a man off the red-hot stove. Hold on, those are my dogs barking. All right, now that my dogs are done yelling at the U-Haul outside, let's pick back up reading. So where were we? They were asking about whether man is controlled by nature or caution, which is a word they're using for nurture. So let's pick back up right here. I knowed you were going to crawl up in that holler, but I'm to smoke you right out. Ain't no nature at all, it's caution, Sam. Ain't no such thing. Nature tells you not to fool with no red-hot stove, and you don't do it neither. Listen, Sam, if it was nature, nobody would have to look out for the babies touching the stove, would they? 'Cause they just naturally wouldn't touch it. But they sure will, so it's caution. So what are they talking about? Now, even though the mannerisms of the men on the porch are silly, they're actually having a pretty philosophical conversation, which is the nature versus nurture conversation. And so, on one side, he gives the example of a baby touching the stove, saying that if a baby touches the stove, then it must be nurture, because if it was nature, the baby would know not to touch the stove in the first place. And so on the next page, let's consider Sam's counter-argument about nature. Nah, it ain't. It's nature, 'cause nature makes caution. It's the strongest thing that God ever made. Now, fact is, it's the onlyest thing God ever made. He made nature, and nature made everything else. Nah, nature did it neither. A whole heap of things ain't even been made yet. Tell me something. You know of that nature ain't made? She ain't made it so you can ride a butt-headed cow and hold on to the horns. Yeah, but that ain't your point. Yeah, it is too. Nah, it ain't neither. Well, what is my point? You ain't got one so far. Yeah, he is too, Walter cut in. The red-hot stove is his point. He know mighty much, but he ain't proved it yet. Sam, I say it's caution, not nature, that keeps folks off the hot red stove. How is the sun going to be before his paws? Nature is the first of everything. Ever since self was self, nature been keeping folks off red-hot stoves. That caution you talking about ain't nothing but a humbug. He's a insect that nothing he got belongs to him. He got eyes, like something else, wings, like something else, everything. Even his hum is the sound of somebody else. Man, what are you talking about? Caution is the greatest thing in the world. If it wasn't for caution, show me something that caution ever made. Look what nature took and done. Nature got so high in the black hen she got to lay a white egg. Now you tell me, how come what in a man that he got to have hair around his mouth? Nature. That ain't. So what are they talking about? Let's check back in. So consider Sam's counter argument about nature. He says that nature makes caution. So it's kind of like the chicken before the egg. Nature comes first and then makes caution. And he's saying it's not the other way around. So what he's arguing is that it's natural to fear heat, which is why we pull our hand away from the hot stove. So yes, the baby's going to go and touch the stove because they don't know what a stove is, but they do know what heat is, which is why they pull their hand away when they touch it. And then another example that he gives is why people grow beards to stay warm. It's because they just know that it will. And so that's Sam's counter argument. And so they're having, like I said, a pretty philosophical conversation here. And one more thing I want to talk about is how nature is linked to God. So remember that this book is called Their Eyes Were Watching God. And so there's a reference to a power greater than our characters. And so here they're talking about how nature is a greater power. And then also Sam even says it's the strongest thing that God ever made. And so we see this connection between nature and God, which is going to come into play later on in the book in a very important way. So keep your eye out for that. All right, let's keep reading. The porch was boiling now. Starks, with anger and laughter. Starks left the store to Hezekiah Potts, the delivery boy, and come to take a seat in his high chair. Look at that great big old scoundrel beast up there at Hall's filling station. A great big old scoundrel. He eats up all the folks out of this house and then eat the house. Ain't no such varmint nowhere that can eat no house. That's a lie. I was there just yesterday, and ain't seen nothing like that. Where is he? I didn't see him, but I reckon he's in the backyard someplace. But they got his picture out front there. They was nailing it up, and when I come past there this evening. Well, all right now, if he eats up houses, how come he don't eat up filling stations? That's 'cause they got him tied up so he can't. They got a great big picture telling how many gallons of that Sinclair high-compression gas he's drinking at one time, and how he's got more 1,000,000 years old. Ain't nothing no 1,000,000 years old. The picture right up there where anybody can see it. They can't make the pictures till they see the thing, can they? How they going to tell he's 1,000,000 years old? Nobody was born that far back. By the rings on his tail, I reckon. Man, these white folks got ways for telling things they want us to know. Well, where he been all this time then? Well, they caught him up there in Egypt. Seemed like he used to hang around there and eat up them Pharaoh's tombstones. They got the picture of him doing it. Nature is high in a varmint like that. Nature and salt. That's what makes us strong like Big John the Conqueror. He was a man with salt in him. He could give us flavors to anything. Now I'm going to pause right here and be completely honest with you. This section of the conversation, I really don't know what the characters are talking about, and I tried to do some research, and I couldn't find what this section was about. So if you're able to figure it out, please let me know in class, or you can even leave it in the comment section below. But I'd be really interested to know what this conversation they're having is about, because I couldn't figure it out. So maybe one of you guys know. Let me know if you do. I'd greatly appreciate it. But let's keep going. Yeah, but he was a man that was more'n a man. Ain't no more like him. He wouldn't dig potatoes, and he wouldn't rake hay. He wouldn't take a whipping, and he wouldn't run away. Oh yeah, somebody else could if they tried hard enough. Me myself, I got salt in me. If I like man flesh, I could eat some man every day. Some of 'em is so trashy they'd let me eat 'em. Lord, I loves to talk about Big John, lest we lies on old John. Okay, so let's pause here, and I want you to consider, coming up, there's going to be some women who approach the house, and I want you to consider the description of Daisy. And that name might sound familiar. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here comes Bootsy and Teddy and Big Woman down the street making out. They are pretty by the way they walk. They have got that fresh, new taste about them, like young mustard greens in the